Hello and welcome to the Liverpool.com podcast. I'm your host, Mo Stewart, and I'm joined by James Martin. And I'm very pleased to say, making his Liverpool.com podcast debut is David Lynch, writer for Sunday Mirror and Sunday People. David, thank you for joining us.
No, thanks. It's good to be here.
Well, I'm glad to see you here. So we're going to put you to a good use. Since we've got a new addition, we might as well talk about additions of our own at Liverpool, because this season's got a lot of excitement and action still to come. But it is the time of the year where minds start to talk to summer business. So we look at Liverpool's squad at the moment and we think it looks brilliant. There's very little that's wrong with it. Klopp's has never had it so good. But with every season, there is the expectation there will be some ins and there will be some outs. So we're going to look through the different areas of the squad, try to analyse what the plans are of Jurgen Klopp and the brand new sporting director, Julian Ward. So let's start at the back, as it's always nice to do. Goalkeeper and defence, we'll group them all together. James, I'll start with you because this one's probably quite an easy question. Goalkeepers. It looks like the first and the second choices are nailed down with Alisson and Creevy and Kelleher. There had been some talk that he may seek more minutes elsewhere, but it looks like he's pretty happy being a cup keeper, which obviously then has a knock-on effect with the man who's currently third choice, Adrian. Expectation seems to be that Kelleher stays and Adrian goes. Is that kind of how you see it as well?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's definitely the hope. Longer term, if Kelleher is getting sort of itchy feet and wanting to play first choice somewhere, you couldn't blame him. From what we have seen of him at Liverpool, you'd say, he probably has the quality to play for, a number of Premier League clubs. But in terms of the international picture now, he's maybe getting more first choice in terms of Ireland. Him and Gavin Bazunu, who's on loan from City, are having a bit of a battle royale for that spot, but he's edged ahead in a couple of games recently, so that's probably assuaged any doubts he's had over his club football a little bit. And of course, being trusted in the League Cup, which ended in the best way possible, kind of hurt things in terms of how he views his Liverpool future. So I think Liverpool will get away with keeping him as a cup keeper for at least another season, which, as you say, basically settles the goalkeeper issue. Alisson's, of course, not going anywhere. Like you say, that does just leave Adrian, who, you'd imagine his time might be up. It's a third choice keeper at the end of the day. So if he's not asking for much, maybe they'll decide to keep him around, but he is taking up a slot, I believe, as a non-homegrown player. So it probably makes sense to do a bit of a Man City, find a Scott Carson somewhere and use them to fill the third slot.
Well, that's the interesting part, isn't it? It's the homegrown quota that has been such a big issue for Liverpool over the last couple of years, David. And Adrian kind of felt like a bit of a safety blanket. It was almost as if we want to trust Kelleher, but we need him just in case we can't. I feel like this season's just gone has meant that we can officially trust him. And is it more likely that as rather than, as James says, looking for an older English keeper, that they might be looking for someone from the youth team to be the third keeper? Because there is a great stable of young goalkeepers at the club already.
Yeah, well, they've spoken a lot about that recently, about, they want to turn it into a goalkeeping school and the coaching setup they've got there and the amount of coaches they've got for goalkeepers is sort of unusual, really, isn't it? And I think a lot of that is the hope is that they can push more keepers through from the youth team. And I think, that's probably going to be something they'll look to do, because I think, the Adrian thing, with him signing a new contract, sort of came as a big surprise to people, I think, and, me included, absolutely. You didn't really think, well, what does that mean for Creevy and Kelleher? But there was never really any doubt in Liverpool's minds about who was the second choice. I think Kelleher had already made that stated his case beforehand, and he was always going to be there. But to have Adrian as willing to be the backup in that sense, and to sort of give up any minutes just to be around the squad and be a help, be good in training, which is he's considered a good character around the squad as well. It has been pretty important, I think. But I think, now he's reaching the end of his deal. It is time to sort of move him on and bring in someone who's, maybe more suited to the style of play. I think that's been Adrian's downfall at Liverpool as well. Not just having Kelleher has come in and taken his spot, I think primarily because of just how good he is with his feet. And I think Liverpool, they need that, whether you're the second or the third choice keeper. So I think Liverpool will move towards that. And as you say, I think, getting someone through from the youth teams would probably be the ideal situation, not least because you don't have to spend any money to do it. It's the smart business decision. And yeah, to have someone who'd be more suited to the style of play coming in, even if they are just a third choice goalkeeper for now, it'd be nice to know that if Kelleher gets an injury and you really want to give Alisson a rest, you're going to have someone who's a really good fit for what they want to do back there.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's like you can afford to take a little bit of risk if you trust that this person knows the system, so that can kind of meter against any experience. But for Adrian, I know that he's obviously split opinion with some Liverpool fans, but as someone who was in Istanbul to see him in that penalty shootout in the Super Cup final, he leaves with my good graces at the very least. Now, we were mentioning the homegrown quota there, James, and we should talk about a couple of homegrown defenders who have been reportedly unhappy with the amount of minutes that they've had so far in the last couple of seasons. That's Neco Williams and Joe Gomez. Now, it is slightly different scenarios for both. We'll start with Neco. He's obviously riding the crest of a wave, having just got promoted with Fulham. Do you think that there's any scope for him, now that Fulham are going to be in the Premier League, maybe remaining there for a season? We've obviously got a good relationship with them through the deal for Fabio Carvalho, which has been done very amicably, considering how it almost fell apart at the end of the deadline day. Do you see this as a move that might suit everybody?
I think they're definitely a plausible destination for him. Whether that's another loan or a permanent destination sort of remains to be seen. The motivation for Liverpool to sanction another loan is quite hard to see, in the sense that when he comes back, nothing will have changed at Liverpool. Trent Alexander-Arnold is still going to be the undisputed first choice. So I think if we do see Williams leave, it will probably be a permanent transfer. And, he's done his case no harm in terms of Fulham maybe wanting to use that newfound Premier League money to make the switch permanent. The thing with Liverpool, they can do what they did last summer and set and in January and set a price. We saw it with Nat Phillips. If no one meets the price that they want, then they won't necessarily sell. They're in a strong position contract-wise with Neco Williams. So I don't think it's necessarily as much of a foregone conclusion as maybe it's been presumed. But if Fulham stump up a fair price, I could easily see him moving on. Of course, that then leaves the question of who's covering. I think the next homegrown player who you might mention could be involved there in terms of Joe Gomez. He's had some minutes at right back. Connor Bradley's coming through. There's some hopes for him. But whether that it also means maybe a foray into the transfer market for someone who can play right back, it's very possible.
It is an interesting point, though, isn't it, Dave? Because it appears that these two are actually now fighting for the same spot, almost, because Gomez has fallen down the pecking order in terms of centre-backs. But in this season, when he's played at right back in the last couple of months, he's looked a much improved player at that position than he had been previously. Has this been something that he's been working on behind the scenes, being him a more viable option there? And do you think that that's going to help him maybe get the minutes that he wants at Liverpool rather than looking elsewhere?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think, as you say, there was a noticeable sort of improvement in him in terms of his ability on the ball in situations where, putting into almost Trent Alexander-Arnold like crosses from the right-hand side, which is, definitely not something you associate with him previously, where he's probably thought of himself as a nailed-on centre-half, and that's where he wants to play. So the fact that he's shown that improvement sort of suggests that he thinks that, yeah, that's a potential way into the team. But, whether he'll be happy with that going into next season, I really don't know. We know he's a good character. He hasn't kicked it before, so he gets his head down in training. He's popular amongst the players. But at the end of the day, even if he can get himself some minutes at right back and, occasionally at centre half, it's still probably not enough because, say the big games come around, the big weeks come around like this, you've got a Champions League semi-final, no matter how much of a nice guy you are and a great footballer, part of a great squad that's challenging for big honours, you want to be on the team sheet. There's no doubt about it, especially if you're Joe Gomez, you're a centre-half who essentially was a key part of a Premier League winning team at such a young age and, played his part in the run in the Champions League the season before injury struck as well. So, he's got every reason to believe that he should be part of a team that wins things. And it's a difficult one. I don't think Liverpool are going into this summer thinking, yes, we will sell him, we want to get rid. But I do think if offers come in, some difficult decisions will have to be made. And I think it will often be player driven as well. It's similar to Neco in the sense that, last summer, I remember Liverpool, basically, if an offer around 10 to 12 million had come in, Liverpool would have been happy to sell. And I think Neco would have been happy to go as well. And I think that will be the same this time around, especially because he's impressed at Fulham. So Joe Gomez is probably going to be in a similar boat. If an offer, I don't know what that figure is, but if an offer comes in that reaches Liverpool's valuation, I think they would probably be happy to let the player go if he wanted to leave, because they're not the sort of club who keeps people around just to have the numbers. They want, they want their players to be happy to be there. So, that one will be dictated really by how the market is, I think.
That's the point, isn't it? It's the because when we speak about Joe Gomez, James, a lot of the time we're speaking about his England ambitions, and that World Cup in a few months is looming large on the horizon. And you look at the England centre-backs at the moment, and I'm not going to name them. We all know who they are. Most of them have been struggling all season long. So there's a real space for him to go and stake his rightful place. And it might be that is the tipping point. Because as Dave has mentioned, although the club will be desperate to keep him, we've seen in the past, Klopp does not stand in the way of someone who wants to go away and play more minutes.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. The England issue gets mentioned a lot. If that is pressing on his mind, he's not left himself long. Even with a summer move, it's a big ask. We know Southgate is quite loyal to his existing group of players. So for him to offset one of the existing favourites in the space of a few months would be a test. But like you say, if there's any position where that's possible, it's centre-back. There have been some struggles for the existing crop. So he probably will still be targeting it, even if it's an ambitious target. And yeah, it's hard to see how he could meet that target staying at Liverpool. We've seen Klopp try and almost put the pressure on in press conferences, saying, I don't know why Gomez isn't being selected, but it's not reaped any rewards. Southgate's unmoved. So yeah, I think probably that will still be on his mind. Whether he makes the squad, I think it's a long shot, even if he gets the move, but it may potentially be the tipping point.
It always makes me laugh when Klopp says that, by the way, because it's like, Southgate could just turn around and say the same to you, But because Southgate's a nice guy, he never does.
To be fair, I think it's more that, Gareth Southgate doesn't have Virgil van Dijk to select it at centre-half, to be fair.
That is true, and I'm sure he would if he had in a heartbeat. So in the scenario where both of these players leave, which I believe is still a live scenario, there have been some tentative links already with backup right backs, David. We've heard about Calvin Ramsey at Aberdeen and Gleison Bremer over in Torino, who's more of a kind of centre-back, right-back hybrid. Obviously, as you said, this is all dependent upon the player's decision. The guys who are in situ have the first hand in that respect. But are these credible links? Do these look like the kind of players Liverpool would be interested in for a backup position?
Yeah, so Liverpool aren't denying any interest in Ramsey at the moment. So I think that is, and you can tell, I think, just looking at his sort of profile, he's the sort of player that they would generally like anyway. So I don't think that's a big surprise. The Bremer one, I haven't heard anything personally, but obviously Neil Jones reported that, and I know his sources are impeccable. So it's definitely one to take seriously. And I think, again, two sort of younger players, maybe different sort of age groups, but still young enough to develop more. They've got, particularly with Bremer, the ability to play in multiple positions. I think that would always appeal. And with Ramsey, you could come and have him as a backup right back to Trent, and he's young enough that he maybe wouldn't expect loads of minutes throughout the season. Wouldn't make it difficult for the manager, but you could always put him in for League Cup games, or if Trent gets a little injury, you've got the option there to slip him in. So yeah, I think both sort of credible links as far as I'm concerned, and I think backup right back is a big one for me this summer. I think it's one of the real priorities, even though the backup right back doesn't sound like it's an awful lot of minutes to fill in throughout the season. I think it's one area where Liverpool have generally over the last few years, finding someone who can step into Trent Alexander-Arnold's shoes has not been particularly easy. So I think I'm not surprised to see names are surfacing now in that position, because it is one I think they finally need to sort, particularly as you look at what they did at left back in Tsimikas and how good he's been for the squad. I think it's important to get someone of a similar profile if you can.
I think that's right. I think everybody is looking for the right side of Tsimikas. Because not only the quality he's brought in, but the way he's actually elevated Robertson. I think a lot of people would say he's had a much improved season when he's got someone behind him. So if we can find that for Trent, happy days. Not that easy though. Now, I'll stick with you as we move into midfield, David, because I want to talk a little bit about James Milner. We heard in February that the club had offered him a new deal, reportedly, which came to the surprise of many, because it kind of felt like it was all kind of coming to the end. It felt like it was almost unnatural end for him in terms of when we've seen him in midfield this season, he's looked a little bit off the pace. It's almost as if sometimes you hear professionals talk about when they know that they're not at that level anymore. It almost feels like that conversation's having with Milner. But the trail's gone a bit quiet since. We've not heard whether he's accepted. We don't really know the nature of this deal. Have you heard anything, or what's your instincts over whether or not he will sign?
Yeah, I was sort of surprised by the stories about a new contract being offered. To be honest, I don't, my understanding not really likely that would happen. To be honest, I don't expect him to sign a new contract. I'm maybe putting my neck on the line a little bit there, but I genuinely I can't see that happening. I think a clean break at the end of the season would be perfect. I think he's had a truly great Liverpool career, but I think you've seen this season that maybe the legs are just starting to go a little bit. Still incredibly high quality player, by the way, who I think could do a job for someone in the Premier League. I'm thinking of one side in particular. Leeds are the obvious link there, but I think to do something like that would make sense for all parties. I think Liverpool are going to look at central midfield this summer. I think alongside backup right back is the number one priority for me, is to strengthen in the central area. So I think with that happening, you lose Milner there. Maybe do you move Henderson into that experienced midfielder role of coming in and filling gaps from time to time, and picking up the minutes that Milner did in his early seasons at the club. I think that just makes too much sense for it not to happen, really. And so I'd be very surprised if James Milner was to go on and sign a new deal, to be honest. I think it's maybe time for him to move on, and he would do so with Liverpool legend status, I think, secured with the role he's played in some of these recent successes.
Yeah, 100%. I think the only threat to being the best free signing in Liverpool's history is Joel Matip. He has been fantastic, James, and he will leave with all of our blessings. One of his teammates alongside him in midfield, Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain. It's a slightly different scenario with him. He's going to have 1 year left on his deal. At the beginning of the season, both him and Naby Keita were said to be in a very crucial position playing for a new deal. It appears that Naby has been successful, but if you look by comparison, Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain's season has not been quite as good. And again, he's another one who there are reports that he's kind of unhappy with his lot at Liverpool at the moment. Would you be surprised to see him move on this summer?
I wouldn't be surprised. Sorry, David.
Please go on.
No, it's one of them where I think it's another one where it's a buyer-dictated market in terms of if the interest is there. I'd be surprised if Liverpool said no to it again, if the interest is sufficient. But yeah, equally, I'm sure we'd be happy to keep him around for another season if no one came in with a reasonable bid. He won't play much and he won't be happy with that. But yeah, it's if there's no good bid that comes in, what you're going to do? He's going to have to stick out the contract. But he has shown flashes when he has played, and fitness has been less of an issue this season. So you could see sides being potentially happy to take a punt on him. I know. I think it was last year Arsenal was sort of tentatively linked to. I think it was in the winter window last year. Whether they've maybe evolved beyond that, or whether they still fancy it, I don't know. But you'd think that at some reasonable level there'd be a club willing to take a chance on him and give him the minutes he wants. So yeah, I do think that is a likely departure, like you say, with Keita having sort of nailed down that spot as the next in line in midfield, and also having sorted out his own fitness issues, hopefully. It does seem Oxlade-Chamberlain is maybe edging towards that kind of surplus to requirements territory.
He's one of those I could see really sort of driving his own exit this summer, because I think you have seen signs of him being unhappy in public in terms of, when he's been substituted, sort of looking very frustrated. And it's understandable, by the way, because, he's not been getting the minutes. And then when he has been getting the minutes, he's maybe not been feeling that he's been playing as well as he might be able to. And I can understand that. And so I think, it's one of those where him and his agent will probably put their heads together and see if they can find a way out, because I think, I don't think his situation is going to get any better at Liverpool at the moment. And, it's a shame. And I think his injury really sort of killed his momentum at Liverpool, didn't it, ultimately? But I think if you can find a good move out, and I think he should be able to, a decent sized Premier League team would definitely be interested in a player of his caliber. And if you can get regular minutes out of him, you can get great football out of him. So, yeah, I think he's one of those who would maybe push for his exit and try and generate some interest in himself if he can, coming into this summer, to try and get his move away.
It'll be interesting to see what the market is like for him, because I feel like there will be quite a few midfielders moving around in the Premier League, and maybe a West Ham or even a Leeds United who've lost one of their star midfielders might be the perfect place for him to go and kickstart his Premier League career again, as we saw with Jesse Lingard. Now, previously, when it came to Oxlade-Chamberlain, David, one of the things about him staying was he was another one of the homegrown quota. But I believe that we've already got a new homegrown midfielder in Fabio Carvalho. I believe he qualifies coming into the next season. And he looks a very, very exciting prospect. Now, we've got two other young English midfielders in the team, in Curtis Jones and Harvey Elliott. Do you think they'll be competing for the same spot? Do you think that there'll ever be a time when there'll be more than one of them in the same Liverpool midfield?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think with Elliott and Carvalho, the fact that that signed quite close together, they're obviously surely there's some sort of capacity to play them both on either side of that sort of 2-8 that Liverpool play with a 6 behind them. And obviously they've got some decent competition for that to happen in there. So. But yeah, you'd like to think a few years down the line that both will be able to do that. With Curtis, I think he's an interesting one because he sort of seemed very sort of suited to that sort of playing in the 8s, pushing onto 10s position. He did a lot of that in the youth teams. But I think Klopp has spent a lot of time with him trying to turn him into a more rounded midfielder, more defensively savvy, a bit more of a sort of Wijnaldum replacement really at times. I think he's sort of taken some of the sort of spontaneity out of him, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean just to make him more of a sensible midfielder, someone who knows what his job is in there. So maybe all three together is possibly difficult to see because you'd be probably pushing Curtis into the 6th position at that point. But three really great options who I think that over the years could pick up a lot of minutes, and all three players if Fabio Carvalho comes in and makes a similar impact that Curtis and Harvey have at Liverpool, then you could see a source of midfield there, or three very, very good options for a number of years in the future, which is just extremely exciting, I suppose.
It is. I mean, what you were saying there with Curtis sounds very similar to what Jose Mourinho did with Joe Cole. And it wasn't so much just that he kind of shaved off some of his more extreme edges. He just kind of made it work into a system. And if we can get that out of Curtis, that'll be fantastic. Now, the interesting thing with Fabio Carvalho, James, he played a lot of time for Fulham in the number 10 role, which is a number 10 role that doesn't really exist in Klopp's Liverpool. And the former Liverpool player he's been compared to the most that I've seen is Philippe Coutinho. And as we saw, Philippe Coutinho didn't really fit. Now, do you see this as being something where Liverpool are going to maybe have another option in terms of formation, or do you just think this is a young player and we will eventually be able to, as David was saying with Curtis, bring him into our system, use what is good in his game to work into our system?
Yeah, I think probably more the latter, but there is a case of options as well. I mean, you look at FSG's position now; it's kind of an awkward one in the sense that when they're signing young players, they're signing players for well beyond the Klopp era. So in terms of the preferred formations, that isn't necessarily set in stone. Of course, they'll probably be looking for as much continuity as possible when the time does come to change the manager. So whether that means they find someone who is likely to prefer the same formation, we'll see. Obviously, if Linders takes over, you'd imagine it would be much the same in terms of the shape, at least at first. But yeah, when there's so many unknowns, I think options can't hurt. So the key thing in signing young players more than anything is just their ceiling and how talented they are. And Carvalho obviously emphatically ticks that box. And I think it will be a case of, we'll see further down the line exactly where he can fit in. But yeah, in the here and now, there's bound to be confidence that he can be made to work in the system one way or another. Like David was saying, probably in one of those number 8 roles as part of that kind of rotation. Whether his long-term future is returning to a kind of reinstated number 10 role at Liverpool, it's a nice possibility to have, but I don't think anyone will be necessarily relying on that possibility as the reason for signing him or anything like that.
Well, we've seen with other Liverpool players that where you start on the pitch and where you affect the pitch can be slightly different. So we'll have to wait and see with Fabio. I'm very excited about what's coming. And I'm sure all of our listeners and watchers will be excited about the next question coming up, David, because it's time to talk midfield reinforcements. And the two names that have been linked with us forever and ever, Jude Bellingham, Aurelien Tchouameni. These are two players who are highly coveted and aren't necessarily guaranteed to be moving this summer. Now, I'm going to ask you a two-pronged question, and you may not be able to give me an answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway. First of all, do you believe that Liverpool intend to try and buy both players this summer? Or do you think that it might be a case of trying to stagger them, knowing the way that Dortmund tried to work in not losing more than one big star per summer?
Yeah, I'd be surprised if sort of both were to come in at the same time. I just don't think that's how Liverpool operate. And also, you know, particularly you still look at that midfield, and even if you lose Milner this summer and you lose Oxlade-Chamberlain, you know, that it's still pretty stacked in there really in terms of numbers. You know, the idea that we bring in two players who would probably be looking to play regularly immediately to replace players who didn't play particularly regularly, it would really sort of surprise me, to be honest. I think with both these names, really, I think it's dictated by what the market looks like. Bellingham in particular, I think, is one that they would really, really like to sign if they could do. But I think, you know, do they think he's far enough in his development yet? In terms of, you know, I know it sounds ridiculous. I think he's an absolutely unbelievable player for his age, but, you know, wouldn't they like to keep him in Dortmund for maybe another year just to play a little bit more football rather than coming into the demands of playing for Liverpool? And also, you know, if it gets to a point where two clubs with sort of bottomless pockets get into a bidding war over him and the price starts going to 80 or 100 million, Liverpool might be able to say to themselves, look, okay, we might not be able to get the exact Jude Bellingham, but we can get a central midfielder who can work in our system and can do this and that and all the things we need them to do for a lot less than that. And okay, may not be the star quality of a Jude Bellingham, but can do similar things or get close to that or close enough as they need. So yeah, it's an interesting one. If Bellingham were to really push for a move to Liverpool and sort of keep his price down in that way and say this is the only place I want to go, then I think it's definitely a deal that could be done. But we'll have to see what the market looks like. I think he does seem. I would say that he seems to have sensible people around him advising him. He doesn't seem like the player who will just go for the money or go for the biggest contract. I think he's a player who will really wants his next move to be a sporting one and a sensible one. So I think that really sort of works in Liverpool's favour in terms of possibly getting him in, because you know what's more appealing than in terms of a sporting project than for a young player with that level of talent than to work with Jurgen Klopp in this Liverpool team. I can't think of any other team who are comparable really in terms of taking the next step of your career. So hopefully it will work in Liverpool's favour, and they do definitely like him.
It is a very interesting conundrum when it comes to Bellingham, James, because David's right. There are strong arguments to say that another year at Dortmund would possibly suit him better than coming to Liverpool immediately. I just think in terms of the different roles that he has within that midfield, there's been a lot of talk of them giving him more responsibility next season, so that might help his development. But the flip side of that, it can't be a lot of fun playing for Borussia Dortmund right now. Bayern Munich just won their 10th title in a row by beating Dortmund quite easily. They got knocked out in the group stages of the Champions League. They didn't really make it far in the Europa League either. And he's looked a little bit testy on the pitch. I think it's fair to say there's been a few times when he's been caught arguing with his teammates. Do you see, as David said, this be something where he tries to force Dortmund's hand to move now rather than next year?
Yeah, I mean, he was screaming at Nico Schultz in that clip that did the rounds, wasn't he? But yeah, I don't think he would necessarily push it through this summer. He knows how Dortmund works, and he also knows that he does owe some sort of debt of gratitude to Dortmund in the sense that they've taken a chance on him. Obviously, he looked very, very good in the Championship, but Dortmund have elevated him to this status where all of the big clubs would love to sign him, where, you know, prices of, as David said, 80, 100 million are being bandied about. And I think that the project that Dortmund pitched to these young players who they signed is very clear, and they know that they will be allowed to get that big move eventually. And so if it's a case of Dortmund saying, look, we're probably losing Haaland this summer, you know, give us one more year, I think probably, again, as David said, with the good people around him, I don't imagine he would necessarily kick up a huge stink to get out this summer. But I think it could even suit Liverpool in other ways in terms of the existing midfield profile, waiting that extra year. You look at someone like Jordan Henderson in a year's time, maybe that sort of regular starting berth will be dropping away. Even Thiago, you know, you'd imagine the way he plays, he has more longevity, but he will be getting on So, for next season, you'd say, okay, he's a guaranteed starter whenever he's fit, but maybe the season after that, you're starting to look at ways to phase him out for the future. And that's when, this sort of generational midfield talent would be, the ideal addition. So I think that there's elements which means it would work for all parties.
That sounds like a fantastic long-term plan, and I'm sure that's exactly what Liverpool are trying to do. Whether other clubs get in the way, we'll have to wait and see. Regarding Tchouaméni, David, now the reason why the links have been so strong with him, I feel, is partly because Liverpool have currently Jordan Henderson as the Fabinho replacement, i.e. he plays number 6 when Fabinho wants to rest. But there are times when Jordan Henderson might be needed elsewhere within the midfield. There are times when he himself needs a rest. So I feel like having a backup 6 feels like another one of those strong priorities within the Liverpool camp. Do you agree?
Yeah, maybe, but I can't say that I know sort of an awful lot about those links, to be honest. I know he's incredibly highly rated. I know Real Madrid are sort of in the mix by all accounts. I think one thing I would say about that is it doesn't strike me as a move where he'd be willing to sort of move on to somewhere to be someone's backup. I think he's maybe a little further along in his development than to come in and sort of sit behind Fabinho, who, touchwood, has got a very good fitness record and plays an awful lot of games every season. So I think that would maybe be the difficult one. I'm not, again, I'd say I'm not completely au fait with how he is as a player. So I don't, if he's capable of playing in other areas of the midfield and rather than just the 6. If that's the case, then, maybe he is a player that could appeal. But yeah, he's an interesting name. I did just see those Real Madrid links though. And if they do have a vacancy at number 6 maybe coming up, then, maybe that might appeal a little more to it.
Yeah, I feel like Real Madrid may well be the stumbling block to quite a few of Liverpool's plans over the course of the next few years, not least the Champions League final, but we'll see about that. Now, moving on to the forward line, this is where it gets really tasty. James, first we have to mention Lord Divock, because obviously he blessed us once again with a goal at the weekend, but it looks like his reign is coming to an end. Now, Liverpool do have 5 other frontline forwards as it stands, plus Takumi Minamino. So you would expect that his minutes would be easily absorbed by those players. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. Even if you wanted to directly replace Origi, I don't think you can, because it's just a very unique player, one who, hardly ever plays. And then there's just certain fixtures where it feels inevitable that he will be able to make the impact. The fact that Klopp turned to him against Everton sort of summed up the kind of player he is. There's just very specific occasions where he's very, very useful, whereas the rest of the time is never to be seen. So I don't think there is a way of replacing that. So in terms of the kind of cup minutes, the more kind of orthodox reserve striker minutes that don't come at 0-0 in a massive derby where you need to win to get your Premier League hopes alive, the more normal role of a backup striker, I think that will be absorbed by the players already at the club.
God bless him. It'll be very sad to see him go. I genuinely will be. And as much as we joke slightly about the use of him, he very much sounds like Liam Neeson with his specific set of skills. He has given us something that we don't necessarily have in the profile forwards. I mean, the way that we played in the game against Everton, putting balls in up to his head and to his chest for him to distribute, there isn't really anyone else in the side like that. So, David, if we are looking for new forwards, and we're going to come on to the guys who may or may not be renewing their contracts, do you think that kind of height, that kind of aerial presence is something that is important to Liverpool in the profile of forwards going forward?
Yeah, it's a difficult one really, because you look across the squad and, like you say, that Liverpool don't really have anyone who is that similar sort of centre forward profile really, But then the last couple of times he's signed a forward, they haven't gone for someone who's like that. They've ended up playing Jota as a central forward, and he is incredible in the air, by the way, but not tall, not someone you necessarily think you can play off, and maybe his link-up play isn't quite there at the Firmino level yet. Hopefully that's something he can develop, but. Yeah, so it doesn't, and obviously Luis Diaz is the other, and obviously he's just an out-and-out winger at the moment. We'll see what his journey takes him on, but yeah, it's not a profile that Liverpool have signed regularly. So you don't know whether maybe the next forward is that, or whether that's not something they feel like they desperately need. Outside of those, as you say, those extremely specific situations that Origi tends to come into. it's an interesting one. I think Liverpool have got some difficult decisions, I think, to make around the forward area, because so much of it has been based around what they've done with Firmino and the other two, Mane and Salah, either side of him for over so many years. He's having that sort of number 9 who drops into the number 10 positions, the false 9 rather, and then having your wingers being the main goal threat from there. And obviously they're trying to mould Jota into that centre forward who does that similar work. Do they think that's workable? And do they think they want the forward line to have a different sort of complexion going forward? Do they want an out-and-out centre forward and maybe you take some goals away from the wingers and ask them to do different types of work? It's a really interesting one. I think Firmino's key to it as well, maybe rather than Origi, just because he's probably the most sort of unique player in that set. He's got a very sort of, his skills, particularly even more than Origi just scored against Everton, are more based on things that other people in the squad can't really match and can't really do. So, it's quite difficult to say what the profile of Liverpool's next forward design will be, because that, it isn't sort of, there's no one that matches that Firmino role, that centre forward role in that, and plays it in that way, which is why Origi's had so few minutes, I suppose, over the last few seasons. So, yeah, very, very difficult to predict. I think it's far easier to sort of say who out of that forward line will be on the way shortly.
Well, that's handy, because that was going to be my next question. I'll ask you both this. David, you may have some more inside information. James, you may just go on gut feeling. In fact, James, I'll come to you on this first, because what David says is a really good point in terms of how the forward line looks and how it plays really does depend upon who stays and who goes. And Mane has done himself a massive favour, it looks like, in recent months by adding another string to his bow, and a very, very useful string at that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll keep my answer short because I'm eager to hear what David has to say. But yeah, no, it's definitely helpful. Mane's not done himself any harm to reinvent himself in that way. You were maybe thinking before that, okay, this decline is harsh because he was still playing quite well. He was still contributing, but you're thinking, it's not the Mane we saw at his peak on the left wing. Maybe with that 2023 date looming, you're thinking, okay, well, maybe it's time to move on, particularly if you can have, find a buyer in the summer, make a bit of money back on him, and then look to reinvest in the future. But yeah, that picture has completely changed in my view anyway. Just he's looked so good through the middle. If Liverpool do win any more competitions this season, a lot of it will be down to that switch. He's been one of the best players since coming back from the African Cup of Nations. How much of that is confidence in terms of coming back as a winner and then qualifying for the World Cup shortly afterwards? Maybe that plays a part, but I think a lot of it is tactical. He's just looked so well suited to this new role. I suppose the knock-on effect of that is, what does it mean for Firmino, in the sense that Klopp seems to be preferring Mane as that number 9, and then you've got Jota, who was sort of the first choice before Mane made it his own. So then you're looking at Firmino and thinking, well, okay, where does he fit into the equation? So maybe he's potentially the most at risk of the three. And then, of course, you've got Salah, who, I mean, it's well-covered ground, isn't it? But everyone wants him to sign. He wants to sign. But he said it's not just about the money, but I'm sure the money is a significant part of it. But yeah, hopefully that all gets resolved.
Notice he said it's not all about the money. He didn't say it's not at all about the money. It's not stupid as I'll know, I'll tell you that much. So, Dave, 64 million question time. If I had a gun and I had to put it to your head, how many and which of the three do you think will sign?
Well, so it was put to me by someone recently that they expected sort of 2 of the 3 to stay. And so much of it is obviously contingent on what happens with Salah's contract situation. He is the one out of all of the 3 that they obviously want to keep the most, the one that's willing to pay the most to. And they're desperate to get that done. I'm sort of edging on the side that it might get done at the moment, but it swings wildly back and forth depending on who you speak to. So I and if I was to put my neck on the line here and to pick 2 of the 3 that they would keep, I think Mane's renaissance at centre forward and his form recently might be key. Although I would have said maybe Firmino a few months back, just because of what I said about him being quite a unique player, and also he's got that personality where you think he's not demanding minutes all the time. But I think at the moment, if I had to pick the 2 or 3, I would say Mane and Salah to stay. But that's just just on today. That's my answer. So,
I mean, I'm not going to press you for anything more, but the point is that it really is such a complex and complicated situation, because each individual on their own have many pros and cons. But when you put it into the fact that you're trying to do all 3 at the same time, and how much influence one might have on the other, it makes it harder. Almost like they shouldn't have been trying to do all 3 at the same time.
yeah.
But that's the story for another day. Now, in the worst case scenario in which Salah isn't persuaded to stay and he does look to leave, do you believe that we will seek a summer sale rather than allowing him to run out a contract and go on a free elsewhere? And if so, do you have any idea of who we may be looking at? The names we've seen so far, like Karim Adeyemi, Cody Gakpo, even Darwin Núñez, although that might have been a whole Liverpool playing this guy, let's make him unsettled scenario. I mean, it's difficult because Liverpool don't want to have to entertain replacing Salah, but at the same time, they're a business, so they have to.
Yeah, but I don't get the impression that Liverpool are even planning for the idea that he's going to leave this summer. I just think this is going to either get resolved quite quickly or will drag on into next season, because the idea that they can force it into a situation where they cash in on him, his options are quite limited in terms of where he might want to go. I can't really see where Salah pushes for his move, which is partly why the contract discussions are sort of slightly in Liverpool's favour. There's not really that many places that are appealing as an alternative to Liverpool, apart from maybe the only other place you could say you would go where guaranteed trophies and a really interesting project is Manchester City. Now, if Liverpool feel the hand is forced, I don't think they're going to sell into Manchester City, because that is just shooting yourself in the foot, isn't it, ultimately? So, in terms of other places, other clubs that could put up the money and put up the package that Salah might want, does he really want to go to PSG? We've seen the scenes there as they were winning the league this week. It's just not a really appealing place to play your football, really. So, and I think Bayern really wouldn't push out the money for a player of his age profile. They tend to sort of try and sign younger if they can do and develop. So, yeah, just not really one I could sort of see. I can't see him forcing his way out this summer. I think even if that contract situation doesn't get sorted yet.
No, I think I'm leaning that way as well. And I agree. I think the biggest card Liverpool have is how much better a situation we're in than pretty much everyone else in world football, James.
Yeah.
Like, we can't stress that. And that's even before we potentially won another 3 trophies this season. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? If we do win this quadruple, and I'm sure all of the players will get an extremely healthy bonus for doing so, James, can he really say he'd be better anywhere else?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't hurt Liverpool's hand, does it, that they're one of the best clubs in the world? Yeah, it's not a bad position to be in. I don't necessarily think success or not in the quadruple quest will have any particular bearing. Like, the fact that we're still in the hunt for it this late in the season is proof enough of the level Liverpool are competing at. Obviously, all of the players would love to get even one more of those trophies on offer, and like you say, I'm sure there would be some financial incentive that comes with it. Liverpool traditionally have done a kind of bonus based contract structure. But yeah, I don't think it's going to have a bearing on the future. But yeah, absolutely, the fact that Liverpool are so competitive does mean that there are very limited options for Salah, because even if you generously say there are a couple of extra clubs there who could maybe afford him, it's a case of whether he'd want to go. Barcelona would have to pull off some very creative accounting to get it done. But La Liga do have that sort of 1 to 4 rule where every saving they make, they can reinvest 25% of it. So if Coutinho goes, Dembele goes, maybe they could scrape the cash together somehow. But it's, again, you look at it and think, I mean, why would Salah choose to go there just on a purely competitive footing? So, yeah, it does help Liverpool, and it does probably mean that there's slightly less urgency than there would normally be on that contract situation, even though obviously we all want it resolved as soon as possible.
we all need it resolved as soon as possible, James. I don't think, coupled with the excitement that's left to go in this season, I don't think our nerves can take it, to be brutally honest. But we've been through the squad here, and it all looks rather encouraging. Every single department looks like we're ready to compete next season on four fronts, whatever happens. But as it sounds and as it stands, looks like it's a very interesting summer ahead for Liverpool, and for particular Julian Ward. All the best. Now, David, James, thank you very much for taking us through this today. I'm sure we've all enjoyed it, as I'm sure you've enjoyed it out there as well. We'll see you next time.